Hey everyone. Hey, it's your favorite host, Marcus of Gentleman Style Podcast Show. Today we are going to talk about something not necessarily new, but still interesting, and the market is in a complete uproar. But I got some good news. I have the expert, one of the many experts. This man here, we are going to talk about Bitcoin, blockchain, and get your questions answered so we can make a wise investment decision in this changing economy. And you won't want to miss 1 second of what he has to say. So stay with us. Stay tuned. Here we go. Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Marcus of Gentleman Style Podcast Show. And today I have Brian D. Mint. This man is the author of the upcoming book Bitcoin Evangelism. Mr. Brian is also the chief marketing officer for Atheneum blockchain for over 3 years and resigned in 2021 in order to focus more on Bitcoin blockchain education, which is what he's here to do today, to help us figure out this crazy market and navigate on what to do with our Bitcoin, what is Bitcoin, what's blockchain, and how do they all correlate. He's here to help us navigate this slippery slope. He also is this man has led the lead author on Bitcoin Evangelism, and his book is phenomenal, getting major attraction and is drawing more and more crowds to it, so that they can get a better understanding across the globe on investors on what they can do with their money. This man here, help me welcome to the stage, Mr. Brian D. Mint. Welcome to the Gentleman Style Podcast Show, sir. We are in a limbo. The economy, recession, COVID-19, and cryptocurrency is seeming to just go. It was volatile before, but now it's really kind of just scary news. Help us get to a better state. But first, sir, you made a move. Why did you completely leave your 9 to 5 to deal with Bitcoin and teach and educate on Bitcoin and blockchain completely and fully?
Yeah, well, thank you for the intro. I'm really excited to be on your show. You got a great show here. For 3 years, I was focused on marketing for a blockchain project, and we had a lot of success with that project, and it's still going to this day. I'm on great terms with that team. I really believe in their vision. But what we were finding was I was the head of marketing. I was the marketing executive. And when we were going to venture capital firms and we were asking for investment in this blockchain startup, the question we would get once we would do our product presentation pitch to these people, they'd say, we don't know what blockchain is. We don't know what Bitcoin is. We were going in with the assumption that they had called us interested in investment, or if we reached out to them, that they were somewhat familiar with it. But what I got time and time again is that we were at stage like 4 or 5 when we were talking about Bitcoin or when we were talking about blockchain technology. And these people needed a level 1 introduction to it, or maybe a level 2. And so after 3 years of that, I said, you know what? Somebody needs to go back and somebody needs to write a book for these people, because there's lots of great books out there that are very academic, without saying it, they can be kind of complicated. And so they explain it and they do a great job of it, but it's not written for the layperson. And so even going to venture capital firms where these people were managing hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars, those people need new technologies broken down to them in very simplistic ways. And so this book that I set out to write, it's called Bitcoin Evangelism. It's for everybody from the layperson all the way up to the layperson that might manage hundreds of millions of dollars, because we all need complex things broken down in a simple way. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care what your occupation is. We need some of these things distilled down to their simplest forms. And that's what I've set out to do.
Absolutely. And Bitcoin Evangelism, you can get this on his website, y'all. So Bitcoin Evangelism, what can readers expect? Like how long did it take you to produce the book? And then two, how long of a read is it going to take? Is it going to take 1 day, 2 days, a week? How long is it going to take to absorb this knowledge?
That's a great question. So it took me, the writing process was pretty fast. These are concepts I've been thinking about probably for 3 or 4 years before I even sat down to write the book. Once I sat down and outlined the book, it took me about 2 months to write it. I flew through it. It's about 390 pages. It's got a lot of stuff in there, but there are things that you can jump around in. For example, if you have some particular questions, there's a section in the back. The later chapters, it's called common questions to, or excuse me, easy answers to common questions. And so like if you've heard somebody say, well, I heard Bitcoin was bad for the environment, or I heard it's a pyramid scheme, or what if Bitcoin fails and goes to zero, or is it going to be like MySpace where Facebook came along and disrupted it and put it out of business? Is another crypto going to come along? If you have specific questions like that, you can literally just skip to the back of the book and read that. So if you have very specific questions, you can start right there. And then if you want, as you're like, wow, this is good information, you can go back and digest the rest of it. It takes probably about a week for somebody that's a consistent reader to get through. It's big lettering. There's infographics in there. So even though it's a lot of pages, there's a lot of content that can be visually represented and things like that. So again, coming back to this idea of how do we take a new emerging technology and explain it to people in a simple way. And I think that's the first step for most people, is understanding that what we're talking about here is a technology. We're not necessarily talking about it as an investment first. Yes, there's an investable component to it, but don't even think about buying any of it unless you're convinced of its technological implications. If it's a technology that's here to stay, then Michael Saylor, a famous billionaire, he runs a publicly traded company. This week, he said this quote exactly, and you can go one way or the other with it. He said, Bitcoin's not going to zero. And if it's not going to zero, it's going to $1 million. Now, it's up for the individual to decide whether he's wrong on that or not, if it's going to zero. You can disagree. You might say Bitcoin is going to zero. But if he's right, if it's not going to zero, the supply and demand metrics of Bitcoin are indicating that at some point in the not too distant future, it can have these kind of absurd high run-ups in terms of price appreciation because it is such a scarce asset. And so it's for the individual to seek out what are the implications of this technology. Does it fix problems that currently exist? And if it does, then that could be potentially revolutionary and world-changing in the same way that the internet was, right? If you go back to the 1990s, the world looks completely different today in terms of the way we get our entertainment, our communication, our finances. All these different components are completely different today than they were even in the 1990s, especially if you go back to the 1980s or 1970s. This is the type of transition we're talking about. Those of us that are very pro Bitcoin and blockchain, we see a revolution in terms of technology coming that's, I would even say, more it's more grand than even the technological revolution of the internet. And so what's interesting though about this is you couldn't go and buy pieces of the internet. You couldn't go buy bits and pieces of internet protocol. You could buy companies which were built on top of it, which were good investments, but you couldn't buy the internet protocol itself. If you buy a piece of Bitcoin, now you don't need to buy a whole Bitcoin. You can buy a tiny fraction of a Bitcoin for a penny if you want, but you can actually buy pieces of the protocol itself. You can buy pieces of the programming language, and the financial implications of that, if Bitcoin is successful in terms of changing finance, those implications are huge. So that's the kind of excitement I have in this industry, because I think it is going to be actually bigger than the internet.
Makes sense. I want to start. So there you have it. You can get his book on his website, but I want to start with the micro. We want to work our way up. So what is Bitcoin in its singular form? What is Bitcoin? Why should I be paying attention to it? What's the significant game changer that fintech companies and technology advanced companies are seeing that the average person is missing? Why should we pay attention to Bitcoin?
Yeah, there's a lot of components to that. There's actually 10 components that I talk about in my book about why Bitcoin is specifically game changing. But what I would say in its simplest form is that what makes a blockchain special and why was that such an important technology? Because until blockchain was developed, there was no way to transact digitally from one person to another without a middleman. In its simplest form, all a blockchain is a computer algorithm that reduces that takes out middlemen from transactions. So a lot of people think, well, if I were to send Marcus, if I were to send you $10 over Venmo, that's a person-to-person transaction. It's actually not. It's at least a three-person or a three-party transaction. It's me, Venmo, and you. But in actuality, it's actually a five-party transaction because my bank is Wells Fargo. I have to get approval from them. Then Venmo is the payment rail. And then say if your bank is Bank of America, then Bank of America has their intermediary process. And then finally it gets to Marcus on the other end. That's great. It works pretty efficiently as we know it today, but there's fees and there's hangups that can happen in that. And again, we're in the United States where we have the most efficient version of this. But blockchain and Bitcoin, what they did for the first time ever was they allowed two parties to transact peer-to-peer. It's just like if you sent me or if you handed me cash, there's no middleman in that transaction. That's the same thing that's happening with a Bitcoin transaction. It's like you handing me digital cash through the internet with no middle party. So there's nobody to censor the transaction. There's nobody to stop it. There's nobody to say, hey, you know what? We don't like Marcus, so we're not going to allow his transaction to go through. That at its most fundamental level is why Bitcoin is so important. And then you can get into all sorts of other aspects like the scarcity of Bitcoin, which I think is another compelling one. Until Bitcoin and blockchain was created, they were created at the same time. It's kind of a joint technology. But until Bitcoin was created, there was no way for us to make something that was digital scarce. And so what I would mean by that is if you go into a Word document and you type out a bunch of words, you can just highlight the words, copy and paste those words. You can copy and paste them infinitely. We even saw this with music. If you go back to Napster and the music downloading days, that completely upended the music industry because when song files went digital, they lost a lot of their monetary value because you could copy and paste them and download them and share them for free. There was no way to kind of make music files or digital files scarce. And so that completely changed the music industry. But with Bitcoin, you can make digital things scarce. And so if you're going to have a digital money, you need to be able to make it scarce. And that's what a lot of people are seeing with the way the Federal Reserve is printing money. And we've seen over the last few years that governments, central banks can print money at will. This is the antithesis to that. There is an actual finite supply of Bitcoin. And so the sales pitch on that in this kind of context is really, really high.
Love that. Love that. So Bitcoin is the actual currency being exchanged, and the blockchain, how I understand it, is actually kind of like a ledger or a balance sheet in your checkbook that's keeping track of the transactions as they're exchanged between person to person, versus cuts out the middleman who Venmo, my bank, and it just cuts out the middleman. And even to that degree, because the US dollar is the US dollar, is made in the United States, I don't have to now change this. If you're across the world, I don't have to change this into your accepted currency. It's a nationally accepted currency. Is that correct? Is that a fair understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a self-sovereign currency, so it's not nationally sovereign. Self-sovereign means that you can have full control over it, but there's no country or entity or anything that has control over it. All other currencies on the face of the planet are issued by governments. This is a currency or a digital money that's actually issued by the people for the people. It's decentralized. There's no on and off switch that you can flip off. There's no CEO. There's a distributed network of people that don't know each other, that are just processing an algorithm on their computers. And that's where you get this term Bitcoin mining. If you lend your computer to the network to process transactions, then you can't stop transactions. There's no way for you to stop it. But if you allow your computer to process transactions, then you get paid a mining fee. You get little bits of Bitcoin for doing so. So there's this really interesting incentive structure to allow transactions to be processed. But yeah, to go back to your point, it's not an American thing. It's not a Zimbabwean thing. It's not a Spanish thing. It's a worldwide human thing that exists. We've never seen anything like that. The closest thing to it would be gold. But even gold, because gold, yes, countries would adopt gold as some forms of currency and things like that. But countries could issue their types of coins in gold and things like that. This really is the first thing that's entirely removed from government or third party kind of ownership over a form of currency.
I love that. And I'm glad that you broke that down. When the United States went off the gold standard, right, and the dollar was backed by gold. I'm glad you brought up gold. What makes Bitcoin so valuable? Because what's backing Bitcoin? Is it because there's a finite number of it? What you mentioned earlier, or what makes the value? Because technically there's nothing backing the US dollar, right, anymore, because we went off the gold standard, and it's basically backed by your belief or my belief or another nation's belief that this country can pay back this money. What makes cryptocurrency? What's backing cryptocurrency? Is it gold as well, or something else?
Yeah, no. So there's no gold backing it. It's literally there's no physical component to Bitcoin. So I think that's something that a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their heads around, and rightfully so. My mom, it took her like 5 years to ever touch Bitcoin, because she said, I just can't get this concept that I can't touch it. I can't order a Bitcoin and hold it. I said, yeah, I get that. And the reason there's two types of people in this world. There's people that are called digital immigrants, which is our parents' generation. And then there's digital natives, which I believe you and I are kind of in that cross between the Gen Z people. They're digital natives, like everything digital. Their lives are on TikTok. Their lives are, in basically the metaverse almost at this point. And then there's those people that are in their late 20s, 30s, 40s that are kind of in between. And so maybe it's a little bit easier for us. Maybe it's sometimes harder for us. But to go to your point, what makes it valuable? The ledger itself is actually part of that. And I have a whole chapter devoted to this in the book. So if you're thinking, wow, he only, spent a minute talking about this, there's at least a chapter's worth of content here as far as why it's valuable. But I would say, in my opinion, I have kind of some libertarian leanings in terms of political philosophy, and I think that the censorship resistance of Bitcoin is a really compelling case, especially with what we've seen in the last year. I don't know how but are you familiar with that Canadian trucker convoy that happened?
Yes.
I think it was early 2022. Yeah. So, yeah.
So for my audience, what he's talking about, there was in Canada, there were some truckers who had blocked off an entire intersection, and they weren't doing anything. They weren't harming anyone. They were just kind of gathering together socially, and they were kind of protesting because they weren't making deliveries, they weren't working, they were just protesting and gathered together. And Canada got together and tried to stop them exchange wise, and had to do a lot of things and get law enforcement involved later on. But initially they couldn't do anything, and they had a GoFundMe page. Go check it out. But one of the things they were able to communicate with was cryptocurrency. So go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that was perfect. I appreciate the tee up. And so, yeah, to your point, people don't realize how many intermediaries they are, like we were talking about earlier, in their money. So GoFundMe, people raise donations for truckers to buy fuel and food and all this stuff to keep the protests going. Say, hey, go exercise your free speech. And yeah, you're not hurting anybody. Just go ahead and exercise your free speech. GoFundMe didn't like the point of their protest. And so GoFundMe actually shut that down. They said, you know what, we're not going to give funds to people. So there's an incidence of a third party kind of getting in the middle and blocking the transaction. So they sent the money back to all the donors, and the truckers didn't get anything. Then the next step was there was another one called Give, Send, Go. So another donation platform stepped up. They said, you know what, we're for free speech. We will send the transactions, or we will send the donations. They collected $4 million or something worth of donations. Then they went and sent them to the truckers. The Canadian government at that point then said, anybody that's either giving a donation or receiving a donation, we're going to freeze your bank account. And if they classified it under the Emergencies Act, I believe, as like funding terrorism or something. It was something kind of absurd. And they said, you know what, you could go to jail if you give these. So there's an example. GoFundMe blocked the transaction because a private company didn't like it. Then Canada, even when a private company wanted to help, Canada said, no, we're going to block it. So to me, the value proposition of Bitcoin is tremendous, because what happened next was people started sending in Bitcoin donations, and they kept this protest going. The government couldn't stop it. Now, there were headlines that said the government was freezing people's crypto accounts, but that just wasn't true. There's online exchange accounts. So like if you have Coinbase, which is a popular exchange, that's a regulated institution. Those types of things can be frozen. But if you have a Bitcoin wallet on your phone, or if you have a Bitcoin wallet on your computer, there's nothing that anybody can do to stop that transaction. And so, yeah, Bitcoin is censorship resistant. People weren't able to stop transactions because of that. So just that's one component. Like I said, there's 10 components like that of why Bitcoin has inherent value. Bitcoin, I believe, has inherent value. People say, oh, gold has inherent value because it has industrial use. You can make a bowl out of it, or you can use it for electronics and things like that. Well, that's only about 15% of gold's use is in industrial uses. So most of it's because people hold it as a store of value. I would say that censorship resistance is actually an inherent value to Bitcoin that no other form of money, there's no other form of money on the face of the planet that could have done that to keep that protest going. So yeah, it's one isolated incident. But if I ever have an elevator ride with somebody and they ask me, why is Bitcoin important? Because that whole censorship resistance argument takes 2 minutes, like it like was right there. But the elevator pitch that I'll give to somebody in 30 seconds, they say, well, Bitcoin, it's valueless. Why? There's no value to it. I'd say, how much do you think Visa, MasterCard, and American Express are worth? And they'll say, I don't know, probably hundreds of billions of dollars. I say, you're right. They're worth like $700 billion. Why do you think, why do they have value? Well, because they send money all over the world. Okay, well, that's just a few credit card companies here in the United States. And you're assessing, the market assesses that those inherently have $700 billion worth of value. The act of sending money has value. And so we could say at its base level, Bitcoin being able to send money to anybody on Sunday, you can't send money from your bank on Sunday. You can send money from Bitcoin 24/7, 365. Doesn't matter if it's Christmas morning and your friend in Ukraine needs some money, you can do that. And there's no border. You can actually send money under the most sanctioned nations in the world. Israel, somebody in Israel can send money to somebody in Iran whenever they want. There's no way to do that with any other form of money. So not only can Visa and MasterCard, are they worth something because you can send money, but you actually have more freedom to send money with Bitcoin. So Bitcoin's at least worth $700 billion in terms of market cap. So the fact that it has more functionality than Visa and MasterCard should give it some multiple of what Visa and MasterCard are valued at.
Makes sense. You guys, you need to check out that story, because it was really something. When I got wind of it, with the truckers and the Canadian government getting a hold of their information and putting a stop, GoFundMe blocked them, like Mr. Mint said. But then it was really interesting, because then there were points where the government, I think, subpoenaed some of those agencies to give up the names and bank accounts of the individuals sending money and receiving money. And that's how they were able to classify who's actually doing terrorism under that bill that they passed. Like it was crazy, because the government got together and their political party, and they said, we need to stop this. And hacking got involved, which was crazy. You wouldn't think your government would hack your information, but it got out. And some of those people, they tried to really get into the names of who was sending money and who was and GoFundMe and Coinbase, they have to respond, because like you said, those are big institutions that are regulated by those same governments, so they have to respond. The government can ask them, give me the names of who sent the money, and that's scary when you think of it. So that again has value to it in the privacy of that space. We have to go to a quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere. This is incredible. Mr. Mint spilling all the tea. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Good day, podcast listeners. This is your boy, Marcus Norman of Gentleman Style Podcast Show. I wanted to let you guys know that we will be rolling out a new feature and adding a join sponsor button next to the subscriber button here at the bottom of your screen. Once you click the button, it will display 3 membership levels. Gentleman Gentry, which is our entry level, Duke Duchess, which is our season level, and the Emperor and Empress, which is our most sophisticated level, which you will receive unique perks and benefits at each differing level and gain access to our community tab. We will also be sharing polls, upcoming events, and interviews, as well as receive feedback from our sponsors directly. Your support helps me find new and exciting guests to bring to the stage live. Well, in order to get the higher end speakers, it requires, some, you guessed it, money. So thank you for tuning in to my channel. And if becoming a sponsor sounds good to you, then select the join button below and choose your desired sponsor level. Let's continue to grow and serve the future of generations of men and women to come. Love you guys. Bye.
If you're looking for a reliable professional trucking and logistics service, you've come to the right place. Musa Trucking is a veteran-owned and operated premier transportation provider that can help with all of your trucking and logistics needs. Musa is revolutionizing the trucking industry through strategic partnerships, the development of core personnel, and the use of cutting-edge technology. Our inventory system ensures that cargo ends up divided into the right trucks and reaching the correct destination. Our drivers are dedicated to transporting goods efficiently and safely. Contact us today to get started by visiting the website on the screen or by calling 757-756-5246.
We are back to the Gentleman Style Podcast Show. And today we have the incredible Brian D. Mint spilling the tea on all our cryptocurrency questions. This man is phenomenal. He's just sharing some of the tea. You got to get the rest of the tea in his phenomenal book, right? You got to go check it out. He is called Bitcoin Evangelism. And you can only get that, you can get it on his website. You got to go check him out. Go back. If you missed that, we're going to put it up here on the big screen. Check him out. This book is blowing the minds of readers across the nation because it's spilling, like he said earlier in the show, this is from the beginner level all the way up to advanced level, and it takes you through and it gives you that baseline foundation and walks you through step by step so you can make an wise investment decision. So check him out. And to Brian D. Mint. So, Mr. Mint, right now it is absolutely bonkers. Inflation. Good grief. Gas, groceries, meat, fish. My gosh, I'm gonna have to sell the dog. Like this is crazy. Everything is going up. Is Bitcoin susceptible to inflation? If yes or no, how and why not? How does that work?
That's a phenomenal question. So Bitcoin depends how you look at it. So Bitcoin related to Bitcoin itself. So one Bitcoin always equaling one Bitcoin. Bitcoin is very interesting in the fact that it has kind of a revolutionary monetary policy. So instead of inflation in terms of the amount of Bitcoins being created every day, there's actually a deflating amount. So every 4 years, there's something called the halving in Bitcoin. And today, currently, there's about 900 new Bitcoin that come into circulation. A couple years ago, before that, it was 1,800. Before that, it was 3,600. So every 4 years, it gets cut in half. And ultimately, in about 100 years, no more Bitcoin will be created. So there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin in existence ever. There's about 19 million. We're only about 13 years into Bitcoin. And so That's how halving works. It's pretty crazy. It's like the exact opposite of exponential growth. Halving growth, it diminishes the supply really quickly. So it took about 13 years to make the first 19 million Bitcoin. And it's going to take about 100 more years to make the last 2 million Bitcoin, because the supply keeps getting cut in half. The new incoming supply keeps getting cut in half. And so in Bitcoin itself, it's actually deflationary. So against all other assets, and this is true against gold, this is true against the US dollar, Bitcoin has looked like a crazy line up on the charts. If you go back to its inception, it's had millions of percentage gains against the US dollar, against gold, against stocks and bonds and all that kind of stuff, because it's actually deflating in its supply. So yeah, Bitcoin the US dollar is incredibly inflationary. We've seen 8.6% inflation is what the stated numbers by the Federal Reserve are. It's higher than that. If you talk to anybody that manages capital, they treat capital as though it's losing about 15% a year right now. So a lot of experts think that the actual inflation rate is about 15%. And if I posted a chart on my Instagram the other day. If you go to Brian at Brian.dement, you'll see at 7.5% inflation, about every 3 years, every 6 years, you're going to be more than doubled in price. At 15% inflation, it takes about 3 years to double the price of an asset. So everything that we spend money on is probably going to be double in price in the next couple of years. I don't think that inflation is going to become under control. I know there's a lot of talking points about it getting under control, and I'd be happy to go into that. But I think the long-term trajectory of the US dollar is intended to lose value because we have a $30 trillion national debt. And the only way that you pay off a national debt that you're not paying down, you have to deflate the currency so that $30 trillion, that sounds crazy, but you have to inflate the currency so that a $30 trillion debt becomes almost like nothing. And I think that's the path we're headed towards.
Makes sense. That is scary. It's scary and it's exciting because it sounds like there's a way out, but it's new and it's different, and it requires a lot of work. And that's one of the scary things is because Bitcoin was designed to prevent the government interaction, prevent people from getting in. But now you see talks amongst the government saying, hey, if we do adopt this, we want access. And that's something that it was designed completely against for. So huge thought process there in the schools of thought. What are the differences? Because there are thousands and thousands. And to my brother here at Mr. Rashad's point, he said, I don't trust Bitcoin. And so that's the concept out there. And I think because there's so many of it out there, what's the difference between Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies like Dogecoin had its time to shine, and now Ethereum? What are the differences between these coins?
Yeah, Rashad, I'm right there with you. I didn't trust Bitcoin for a long time. I was telling Marcus off air that's how I started studying Bitcoin and macroeconomics and monetary policy, was because I had some friends that were into Bitcoin, and I was trying to tell them how dumb they were for getting into it. This person that just asked this question here, I mean, Rashad, I don't trust Bitcoin. That leads in perfectly to what Marcus is asking here about why Bitcoin is valuable versus other cryptocurrencies like Dogecoin. So to speak to the other 18,000 cryptocurrencies, not all cryptocurrencies are created equal. Like I just said, Bitcoin has a fixed supply. There's only going to ever be 21 million of them. Almost every other cryptocurrency has an unlimited supply. So in terms of its inflation, there's no difference between those other cryptocurrencies and something like the US dollar. At least the US dollar has utility in the fact that you can pay your taxes with it and you can go to the store and spend it. With Dogecoin and a lot of these other cryptocurrencies, there's really no use case. They're trying to be a currency, but they're not stable enough to be a currency. They're not fixed in supply. And so I would say Bitcoin isn't able to act as a currency right now because it's still volatile in terms of price. I think it's actually more like a digital gold. So if you wanted to store your value in Bitcoin over a long period of time, then it's shown in a tremendous ability to hold value over time and actually increase value. If you held it for the last 10 years, you would get something like 14 million% increase on your Bitcoin holdings. There's no person that's held Bitcoin for 4 years or more that's lost value. It's always appreciated over a 4-year cycle. So if you're looking to go out and buy Bitcoin today and then sell it tomorrow, that's like gambling. There's no difference to that. And other cryptocurrencies are similar in that regard. You asked specifically about a cryptocurrency like Ethereum. Ethereum has a specific use case. And the way I would define the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum would be if, go back to your, think about your iPhone. You have Apple Pay. So if you want to go buy something, you have Apple Pay that's like a payment system, and that's kind of like Bitcoin. And then you have the App Store. So if you want to download Netflix or you want to download Uber or something like that, you want to download an app, you need an app store. That's what Ethereum is. Ethereum's kind of like the decentralized app store. It uses these things called smart contracts to make decentralized applications. And so you think, what is a decentralized application? Well, there's people developing things like a decentralized Uber. Imagine, what does Uber do? Uber, we said earlier in the show, we said what a blockchain does is it removes middlemen from transactions. And so Uber, the company, is just another middleman, right? They provide a great service. They have a great app, but it takes people that have a car and it pairs them with people that need a ride. And so there's a middleman to pair that transaction. That's great. But we can do that with the blockchain. And so you can build a decentralized application on top of Ethereum that gets people that have a car and people that need a ride, and there's no middleman. So the person providing the ride can actually profit because Uber takes about 25% of a cut out of every ride. And so the person that has the car, they could charge, say, 15% more than they normally get. And the rider would get a 10% rate reduction, and everybody's happy, right? The driver's making a higher profit, the rider's getting a lower fee. And so what happens when you get a higher profit margin and you get to reduce your price? Your demand goes through the roof. So I think that companies like Uber, companies around the world that are essentially middlemen in transactions, are going to start to be displaced over the next 5 to 10 years. They're going to be displaced by decentralized applications. And so specifically speaking to Ethereum or Cardano or some of these other smart contract platforms, they do have a utility. So where I don't believe Dogecoin is in that category, it's hard to articulate the use case for Dogecoin. There are other cryptocurrencies that do have a specific use case like Ethereum, like Bitcoin, like Cardano, and a few of those other ones. And that's something that I do break down in my book, are crypto asset classes. In the same way that I was just talking to Marcus about this, in the same way that if you're investing in traditional stocks, Facebook and Coca-Cola are two different companies. One's a tech company and one's an old blue chip, dependable company like Coca-Cola that's been around for over 100 years. You treat those as different investments within your portfolio. The same thing is true with cryptocurrencies. And I have a whole chapter devoted to that, talking about the difference between cryptocurrencies that are trying to be money like Bitcoin, or cryptocurrencies that are decentralized applications, or Oracle protocols, or NFT protocols. There's several different baskets of digital assets within cryptocurrency. And that's where it takes some effort on the side of the investor to research and understand what they're investing in. So I think a great place to start is with Bitcoin. It's really easy to wrap one's head around what digital gold is. And so, I think Bitcoin's a good starting place, but yes, there is room in the portfolio for several other assets.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Woo! That was a mouthful. That was a lot to digest. Oh my gosh. Like, my head is spinning because I'm trying to think. Because again, it's a lot. It's like, what do you say? 18,000 different types of coin. You just got to do your research, but a great place to start is his book. Get a copy, Bitcoin Evangelism, and you can get that on his website. You got to get your copy today if you want to have that foundation and what to do with your money in these crazy times. You want to get ahead of the curve. You don't want to be falling behind on this trend. Well, it's not even a trend anymore. It's here to stay. It's here to be a blessing to all of us. So, how can people invest in Bitcoin? Where should people go to invest? Should they go to Robinhood, or should they go to their broker and say, hey, I want 10,000 on Bitcoin? Like, how do people, what's a normal way of investing in Bitcoin?
Awesome question. Oops, I bumped myself there.
Good.
So there's exchanges like Coinbase. Yeah, you can go through Robinhood. Whatever you do, and if you go through Coinbase or Robinhood, very easy, great consumer-facing applications. It's just gonna be a few clicks of a button. It's not all that much different than buying stocks or anything like that. Now, what I would say with that is start small. Invest with a percentage relative to how well you understand this area. So if you have a 1% understanding of Bitcoin and blockchain, maybe invest 1% of your portfolio in it. There's too many people that have a 1% understanding of it, but they invest 75% of their portfolio in it. It's disproportionate to their level of understanding. And so that's kind of an absurd way to invest. I wouldn't do that with stocks. I wouldn't do that with gold or oil or anything else. If you don't understand it, don't invest in it. So start with understanding, start with the education part of it. But when you're at that point where you're ready to invest, start small. And because it's a new technology and people feel uncomfortable with it, start with an amount and then forget about it for a month. So go on Coinbase, buy $20 worth of Bitcoin, like something kind of inconsequential. If it goes up, it goes down, you're not going to be emotionally tied to it. And then just sit back. Maybe you don't forget about it entirely, but you kind of start paying attention to the markets. Having some skin in the game is going to cause you to read some more articles. It's going to cause you to, listen to some more podcasts like this one. I imagine people that have invested a little bit of money in Bitcoin are much more cued into our conversation, or people that are skeptical about Bitcoin probably as well. But start small. And then when you're ready to significantly invest, say you had $10,000 to invest, I want to try to time the markets. I worked as the chief marketing officer for a blockchain company, and people think that insiders have exact knowledge on what's going to happen to the price. I'll tell you right now, we have no idea what's happening to the price the next day. No idea. It's just that's the case. I wish we did, because then it would be really easy to play the markets, but we don't. And so, we would have a bunch of new users. We would announce something really cool about the platform, and then the next day the price, nothing would happen to the price. And then some influencer that we didn't even know about would tweet about us, and we didn't know it was coming. But then like 2 days later, the price would go up, and we didn't see that coming. So insiders don't know what's going to happen to the price. So if you have a friend that says, hey, I looked at a chart and Bitcoin is absolutely 100% going to go to the moon tomorrow, invest your $10,000 in it. Don't do that. It's a risky way, because if it goes down by 20%, then being at $8,000 is a pretty uncomfortable feeling. I actually had that exact same conversation with a friend today. He said exactly that. I have $10,000 to invest. What should I do? I said, if you want to put that $10,000 in, invest $1,000 per week or per month until that $10,000 is depleted. It's called dollar cost averaging. That's what we do with our stocks and our 401ks. We just put money in every month based on our paycheck. And that's a pretty sophisticated and safe way to invest. Take the old tried and true wisdom and apply it to new frontiers. We shouldn't throw away the old wisdom when we're dealing with new technologies. Let's take the old wisdom and just apply it to the new technology.
Yeah, don't put your life savings in there. Don't do that. Definitely don't do that.
No.
Take your time. That makes so much sense. Sir, you have been phenomenal on this show. Sir, what final nuggets? You've dropped so many nuggets today. What final nuggets do you have for my audience about when it comes to cryptocurrency and the blockchain technology? Because there's a lot of scammers out there. There's a lot of people out there posing as the experts, right? With this new technology. You can't be an expert, and it's still fairly new. We're still trying to figure things out as you go. What nuggets left would you have in your bag of tricks to share with my audience today?
Yeah, well, as far as avoiding scams, I would say, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. There's in crypto, because there's this confusion. It's a new technology. People get confused by it. They don't really know how it works. And so they get the horse in front of the cart, or cart in front of the horse, right? That's the right way to say it. They get it backwards, right? They get it backwards. So there's some lowbrow scams out there. Like if you go on crypto Twitter, you go to Elon Musk's Twitter account, and then you go in the comments, you're going to see things that say, send me 1 Bitcoin and I'll send you 5 Bitcoin back. Who's going to do that? But the reason why those scams are all in the comments is because people do that. They send a Bitcoin to somebody and they say, this just must be how people make money in cryptocurrency. If it doesn't make sense in the real world, it doesn't make sense in crypto. It's not, you don't throw out wisdom. You don't throw out all your common sense because it's cryptocurrency. So that is one of the most common scams, believe it or not, is, hey, send me 1 Bitcoin and I'll send you 5 back. Oops, they forgot to send you the 5 back. So that's a big one. If I had to say one last thing on the value, because Rashad, I really want to convince you over there in the comments. I want to convince you why Bitcoin has value. And maybe this isn't it, but maybe it is. The payment history of the world, we've always had silos. So if you wanted to send a payment from PayPal to Venmo, keep in mind, PayPal owns Venmo. They're the same company, but you can't send $20 from PayPal to Venmo. They're in different silos. They don't speak a common language. But any company that plugs into the Bitcoin protocol now has a common programming language. So for example, Cash App and Twitter, they both plugged into the Bitcoin Lightning Network. It's a protocol that allows you to plug into Bitcoin. Cash App and Twitter, they're not even both payment companies. One's a social media company and one's a payment company. You can now send money. You can send US dollars on the Bitcoin rails, or you can send Bitcoin. You can even transfer dollars in Bitcoin. It's crazy. It's like a train car transporting your dollars. But you can send Bitcoin from Twitter to Cash App or to any other app that plugs into this protocol. It's kind of like back in the day when we had early email. If you were at USC and you were wanting to send an email to a friend at UCLA, you were in the same city basically, but because you could only send emails on campus, it wasn't until TCP/IP, an internet protocol, came along that connected all the universities on the internet, the World Wide Web as we know it today. Once the World Wide Web came along, you could then send an email from one college campus to another, or you could send email from Gmail to Yahoo. You couldn't do that. Most people don't know that. You couldn't send emails from different email servers to each other until the internet protocol came along and created a common programming language. That's what Bitcoin is. It's a common programming language for value so that you can PayPal. You can send PayPal payments to Venmo to Wells Fargo to Cash App to Facebook. It's all going to speak one common programming language. And the programming language protocol is going to be Bitcoin. It is Bitcoin. That's what's happening right now. And so if you think about it as a technology, like I said, there's a lot of value there.
Absolutely. Brian D. Mint. I hope you're sold, Rashad. I hope that helps. I hope you are sold. I'm definitely going to pay attention. I'm going to tune in, and I got to get me a copy of this book. Sir, how can we tune in? How can my audience learn more about you? How can we grow with you and continue to ride this roller coaster, hopefully to the top?
Yeah. So through all the links you posted on Twitter, Brian Dement, on Instagram, Brian.Dement. And then if you want to get the book, go to freshlymintedbooks.com. You can also buy it on Amazon. It's a little cheaper on my website, freshlymintedbooks.com. And I'll tell you what, this is actually the first book in history to ever hide a Bitcoin wallet inside of the book. And so if you know anything about Bitcoin wallets, you can secure your wallet with 12 individual words. I put a Bitcoin wallet with $1,000 worth of Bitcoin, and those 12 words are hidden in the book. So there's one. All the books have all the words in it. So whoever finds that passphrase first, you just download a Bitcoin wallet, you put those words in, and then you own that Bitcoin. So basically, you get to hack my Bitcoin if you buy the book and you find the words.
What? Yep. What? That is a nugget, y'all. Get a copy. I love this show. I love this show. Oh my gosh. Get a copy of the book, y'all. Get it on his website. Tune in. FreshlyMintedBooks.com. For my audio listeners, that's FreshlyMintedBooks.com. Thank you so much, sir. This has been phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. You has helped so tremendously. Sir, I want to say this to you publicly. Don't ever quit. Don't ever give up. We need this. We need that $1,000. No, I'm just kidding. We need what you're doing. We need what you're doing. It is absolutely necessary. So don't ever quit. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your audience. I appreciate you. You have a phenomenal show. So thank you for the opportunity to share.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's my pleasure. And thank you all, my audience, for tuning in to the Gentleman Style Podcast Show. I hope this helps. I hope this helps take your knowledge of Bitcoin, Rashad, wink, wink, hint, hint, to the next level. And I hope you no longer have that fear or that concern, and that you're able to invest and take advantage of this market and take advantage of the opportunity. And so thank you all for tuning in. Like I always end every show, take care of your friends, take care of your family, and always, always take care of business. This is Marcus Norman of Gentleman Style Podcast Show and Mr. Brian D. Mint, the man, the myth, the legend himself. Signing off. Love you guys. Bye.